The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, sharp, sterile, unforgiving. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a pale sheen across the polished floor of St. Germain Medical Center's East Wing. It was nearly midnight, the hour when emergencies slowed just enough for arrogance to resurface. At the far end of the hallway, a woman knelt on the floor with a mop bucket beside her. She moved carefully, deliberately, as though each motion had been practiced 1,000 times. The mop glided forward, back, then sideways, tracing the outline of a dark spill near the nurse's station. Dried coffee. Maybe blood. Hard to tell after 12 hours of chaos. Her name badge swung slightly as she leaned forward. N. Carter, RN. The letters were small. Easy to miss, especially when the woman wearing them was dressed not in scrubs, but in a faded gray maintenance uniform 2 sizes too big. The sleeves were rolled up at the wrists, revealing hands roughened by years of sanitizer and latex gloves. Her hair, dark, tightly coiled, was pulled back into a neat low bun. No makeup. No jewelry. Just quiet. A pair of white sneakers squeaked faintly as she shifted her weight. Behind her, laughter echoed. "Hey, careful there," a voice called out, amused. "That floor's already cleaner than my conscience." The woman didn't turn around. 2 residents leaned against the counter near the charting station, coffee cups in hand. Both wore pristine blue scrubs, stethoscopes resting like medals around their necks. One of them, tall, blonde, smug, nudged the other with his elbow. "I swear," he said, lowering his voice just enough to feel clever, "they'll give a mop to anyone these days. Probably failed out of nursing school." The other snorted. "Or never made it in." Their laughter was casual. Unbothered. The kind that came from people who had never once questioned whether they belonged in a room. The woman's grip tightened on the mop handle. Just slightly. She finished the stroke she was on before rising to her feet. Her movements were controlled, measured, like she was counting silently in her head. 1. 2. Breathe. When she stood, she reached for the caution sign and placed it carefully beside the wet patch. The yellow plastic read caution. Wet floor, the letters bold and loud in a way she had learned not to be. "Hey," the blonde resident called again. "You missed a spot." This time, she turned. Her face was calm. Too calm, some might say. Brown eyes steady, unreadable. She glanced down at the floor, then back at him. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was low, even. No accent anyone could pin down. "I'll get it." That seemed to amuse them even more. "Wow," the second resident muttered. "Polite, too." They drifted away, laughter fading as their pagers chirped and pulled them towards something more important. Something that wore scrubs. Something that mattered. The woman returned to her work. Around her, the hospital breathed, monitors beeping behind closed doors, a gurney rolling past, a nurse calling out vitals in a tired voice. Life and death moved constantly through these halls, indifferent to pride or cruelty. A passing nurse slowed her pace when she saw the woman mopping. "You know Environmental Services cleans this wing at night, right?" she said, not unkindly, but not gently either. The woman nodded. "I know. So, why are you?" "There was a spill," she replied. "And they were short-staffed." The nurse hesitated, eyes flicking to the mop, the bucket, the uniform. Something about it didn't quite add up, but exhaustion won. "Suit yourself," she said, walking on. The woman watched her go, then bent again to wring out the mop. Her reflection stared back at her from the glossy floor, distorted, broken into pieces by streaks of water. For a moment, her expression flickered. Not anger. Not sadness. Memory. She had once stood at this same station in navy scrubs, charting vitals while a trauma team rushed past her. She had once been called Nurse Carter with respect, urgently, desperately. She had once been trusted with lives. Tonight, she was invisible. Or worse, misunderstood. A man on a nearby gurney groaned as he was wheeled past. The woman looked up instantly. "Sir," she said. "Are you in pain?" The orderly pushing the gurney glanced at her, confused. "He's fine. Just restless." She stepped closer anyway, eyes scanning the man's face, his pallor, the shallow way his chest rose. "What's his blood pressure?" she asked. The orderly frowned. Why?" "Because he's hypotensive," she said quietly. "And his lips are cyanotic." The orderly blinked. Before he could respond, a sharp voice cut through the corridor. "Excuse me." A senior nurse approached, irritation plain on her face. "You're not supposed to interfere. Please stick to your assigned duties." The woman straightened. "Yes, ma'am," she said. The gurney rolled on. The moment passed. Just another almost. She returned to the floor. Above them all, unseen and unheard, cameras quietly recorded every inch of the East Wing. Every word. Every laugh. Every overlooked warning. And somewhere deep in the hospital's administrative wing, a meeting was being scheduled, one that would turn this quiet night inside out. But for now, the woman knelt again, mop in hand, as laughter and footsteps faded into the distance. And no one yet knew that the name on her badge, partially obscured by a fold of fabric, was a name this hospital would soon stop breathing to hear. The mop bucket sloshed softly as she pushed it toward the supply closet at the end of the corridor. The wheels squeaked, one of them slightly bent, like most things assigned to night work. She guided it anyway, careful not to spill, careful not to draw attention. Attention was dangerous. Inside the closet, the air was warmer, heavy with the scent of bleach and plastic. She closed the door behind her and leaned her forehead briefly against the metal shelf. Just for a second. Long enough to breathe without being watched. Her shoulders rose and fell once. Then she straightened. She wrung out the mop, hung it neatly, wiped down the handle like she always did. Habits didn't disappear just because circumstances changed. Precision stayed. Discipline stayed. Dignity stayed, quietly. When she stepped back into the corridor, the laughter was gone. The lights hummed. The hospital carried on, unaware of how close it had come to hearing something it wasn't ready for. She walked past room 314. Inside, an elderly woman slept restlessly, her monitor tracing shallow hills of breath. The woman slowed, peering through the narrow window in the door. Her eyes scanned instinctively, oxygen saturation, respiratory rhythm, skin tone. A tremor passed through her chest. She missed this part the most. Not the adrenaline. Not the praise. The noticing. She moved on. At the nurses' station, a different group had gathered, 3 nurses, 1 attending physician. Charts spread out, voices low but sharp. "Who charted this?" the attending snapped, tapping the clipboard. A nurse swallowed. I did, doctor. This dosage is wrong." The woman paused several feet away, hands clasped around the mop handle. She looked at the chart from where she stood. Her gaze narrowed, calculating. Not wrong, she thought. Incomplete. She took a half step forward, then stopped herself. The rule was clear. The uniform decided the value of your voice. The attending corrected the chart with a red pen and stormed off. The nurses dispersed, shoulders tense. One of them, young, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, lingered behind. She noticed the woman standing there. "Oh," she said. "Sorry. We're in your way." "No problem," the woman replied. The nurse hesitated. "You're new, right?" The woman nodded once. Night shift's rough, the nurse said. People get edgy. I understand. The nurse offered a tired smile and walked away. The woman resumed mopping. Her reflection followed her again in the floor, older than she felt, steadier than she looked. 38 years old. A decade and a half of nursing experience folded neatly into silence. She had learned early how people listen differently when they thought you were beneath them. How arrogance softened just enough to reveal mistakes. How laughter often masked fear. She had learned to watch. Down the hall, alarms chirped suddenly, sharp, insistent. A code blue call crackled overhead. Code blue. Room 317. Code blue. The corridor shifted instantly. Shoes pounded. Voices sharpened. A crash cart burst from a supply room, pushed by a breathless intern. The woman froze. Room 317. Her eyes snapped to the door. She knew that room. She had glanced in earlier. Middle-aged man. Chest pain admission. Subtle symptoms. The kind that fooled people who moved too fast. She moved before she could stop herself. The door flew open. Chaos filled the room, bodies moving, orders shouted, hands everywhere. The patient lay motionless, monitor screaming a flat, unforgiving line. Clear. The shock jolted his body, then nothing. Again. She stood just outside the threshold, heart hammering. Epinephrine, now. The intern fumbled with the syringe, hands shaking. Dosage, someone shouted. .1, no, wait. Stop, the woman said. The words slipped out before permission could catch up. The room stilled, not because they recognized her authority, but because confusion interrupted momentum. She stepped inside. His weight, she said calmly. You're overdosing him. The attending turned sharply. Who are you? She met his gaze. Unflinching. Someone who's been watching, she said. You're pushing too much. Adjust. Now. For a split second, no one moved. Then the monitor flickered. A blip. Another. Pulse, someone yelled. The room erupted again, relief crashing through tension like a wave. Orders resumed. Oxygen adjusted. Lines checked. No one looked at her. She stepped back, heart racing, hands steady. A senior nurse turned at last. You, wait. Were you the one who? The attending cut her off. We've got it. The woman nodded once and retreated. Back into the corridor. Back to the mop. Back to invisibility. Her knees trembled as she knelt again, but her face stayed calm. She had crossed a line. She knew it. Across the hall, behind tinted glass and blinking monitors, someone had been watching more closely than anyone realized. A figure in a dark suit stood with arms folded, eyes narrowed. Not at the patient, but at the woman quietly mopping the floor outside the room she had just helped save. He glanced at her badge. Squinted. Read the name. And his expression changed. The man in the dark suit did not move right away. He stood behind the glass wall of the observation room, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid with a discipline that came from years of command rather than comfort. His silver hair was neatly trimmed. His hospital badge, temporary, clipped at the waist. Identified him as E. Whitaker, though few in the building knew exactly why he was there at nearly 1 in the morning. He watched the corridor. Specifically, he watched the woman. She had returned to mopping as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. No lingering glance toward the resuscitation room. No searching for validation. Just the slow, methodical movement of water across tile. Whitaker's jaw tightened. He turned to the hospital administrator beside him, a nervous man who had been talking non-stop since they arrived. Who is that? Whitaker asked. The administrator followed his gaze. Her. Yes. He squinted. Environmental services, I think. Night shift. Whitaker didn't respond. Instead, he stepped out into the corridor. His shoes clicked softly as he approached. The woman noticed him only when his shadow fell across the floor she was cleaning. She looked up, eyes steady, expression neutral. Ma'am, Whitaker said. May I see your badge? She straightened and handed it over without hesitation. He studied it. Nadine Carter, RN. The letters caught the light. Registered nurse. Whitaker inhaled slowly. How long have you been working tonight? He asked. Since 6, she replied. And before that? She hesitated, just long enough to register as careful, not evasive. I work where I'm needed. Whitaker nodded once. Do you always mop floors? When they need mopping. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, then vanished. Where did you train? He asked. Johns Hopkins. The administrator nearly choked. Whitaker's eyes sharpened. Specialty. Trauma. Emergency medicine. Silence stretched between them. Around them, the hospital hummed, unaware that its own narrative was beginning to unravel. Whitaker handed back the badge. Thank you, he said. Please continue. She nodded and returned to her work. The administrator leaned in, whispering urgently. Sir, I'm sure this is just some misunderstanding. Whitaker cut him off. Find her file. Her personnel file. Now. The administrator hurried away. Whitaker remained, watching. He replayed the moment in room 317 in his mind, the clarity of her voice, the precision of her instruction. That wasn't luck. That was experience. Across the hall, the attending physician emerged, rubbing his temples. Relief still clung to him like sweat. Whitaker intercepted him. Doctor, he said evenly. A question. Yes. The doctor glanced at his watch, impatient. Who intervened during that code? The doctor frowned. One of the nurses. I didn't catch her name. She wasn't in scrubs. The doctor paused. Oh. That woman. Yes. The doctor shrugged. She spoke out of turn, but she was right. Whitaker nodded. Interesting. The administrator returned, pale. Sir, he said quietly. You should see this. He handed Whitaker a tablet. The screen displayed a resume, impeccable. 15 years of experience. Commendations. Published research. Former charge nurse at St. Germain's own trauma unit. And then, 3 months ago. Administrative leave. Reason, pending investigation. Whitaker's eyes flicked to the details. A patient complaint. Unsubstantiated. A delay. Paperwork. Silence. Why is she cleaning floors? Whitaker asked. The administrator swallowed. Budget cuts. Legal advised minimizing exposure until the investigation concludes. Whitaker looked up sharply. You reassigned a senior trauma nurse to environmental services. It was temporary. Whitaker's voice dropped. And you let your staff mock her. The administrator's mouth opened, then closed. Whitaker turned back to the corridor. The woman was finishing up, wringing out the mop. Her movements were slower now. The adrenaline had worn off. Fatigue crept in. He watched as she paused, one hand resting briefly on the counter, just for balance. No one noticed. Except him. Whitaker stepped closer again. Ms. Carter, he said. She looked up. You saved a man tonight. She shook her head slightly. I spoke up. That's not nothing. She met his gaze, something old and tired flickering behind her eyes. Sometimes it is, she said quietly. Whitaker studied her for a long moment. Go home when your shift ends, he said. Get some rest. She nodded, uncertain. As he walked away, he pulled out his phone. Yes, he said into it. It's Whitaker. Cancel tomorrow morning's board briefing. We have a different emergency. He glanced back one last time. The woman had resumed cleaning. But the floor beneath her no longer reflected just her own image. It reflected a system about to be exposed. By the time Nadine Carter clocked out, dawn was already thinning the darkness. The sky beyond the hospital windows had shifted from black to bruised purple, the kind of color that made exhaustion feel heavier rather than lighter. She washed her hands one last time, out of habit more than necessity, then removed the maintenance uniform and folded it carefully into her locker. Beneath it hung her scrubs. Navy blue. Crisp. Her name still embroidered over the chest. She didn't put them on. Instead, she changed into jeans and a plain sweater, tied her sneakers, and walked out through the employee entrance like she always did, head down, shoulders squared, invisible. Outside, the air was cool. Clean. Honest. She sat in her car for a long moment without starting the engine. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, fingers still vibrating faintly from the night's restraint. She had crossed a line. Again. The investigation had taught her that lesson well. 3 months earlier, a patient had come in after a motor vehicle accident, multiple injuries, unstable vitals. Nadine had noticed the signs almost immediately, internal bleeding masked by adrenaline. She had pushed for imaging. Pushed hard. The attending had dismissed her concerns. She had documented everything. When the patient crashed hours later, the family needed someone to blame. The complaint had named her. The hospital, eager to quiet things down, had moved fast. Administrative leave. No access to patients. No voice. Just silence. Nadine started the car and drove home. Her apartment was small but neat. She showered, letting the water pound against her shoulders, then sat on the edge of the bed, towel wrapped around her, staring at the wall. Sleep didn't come easily. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Hello, she said finally. Ms. Carter, a man's voice said. Calm. Measured. This is Everett Whitaker. Her spine straightened. Yes. I apologize for the early call. I wanted to speak with you before rumors did. She exhaled slowly. About tonight. Yes. A pause. You acted appropriately, Whitaker said. And you were treated inappropriately. Silence stretched between them, thick with years of swallowed words. I don't want apologies, Nadine said quietly. I want my name back. Whitaker's voice softened. Then we're aligned. Later that morning, a closed-door meeting convened in the hospital's executive conference room. Department heads filed in, coffee in hand, unaware of what was waiting for them. Whitaker stood at the head of the table. We're here to discuss Nadine Carter, he began. A few eyebrows lifted. She was reassigned during an investigation, the administrator said quickly. Standard protocol. Whitaker tapped the table. Show me the evidence. There was none. What followed was methodical. Timelines reconstructed. Documentation reviewed. Footage pulled from the night before. The laughter. The dismissal. The code blue. The room fell quiet. By noon, decisions had been made. Nadine returned to the hospital that afternoon, not in jeans, but in scrubs. Navy blue. Her name bright against the fabric. She walked through the same corridor where she had knelt hours earlier. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. At the nurse's station, a resident froze mid-sentence. "MS. Carter," the charge nurse said, standing. "Welcome back." Nadine nodded. No smile. No triumph. Just presence. She stepped into room 317. The patient was awake now, color improved, eyes clearer. When he saw her, recognition flickered. "You," he said hoarsely. "You're the one who spoke." She smiled gently. "I'm glad you're feeling better." As she checked his vitals, the weight in her chest eased, not entirely, but enough. Outside, the hospital moved differently around her now. More careful. More aware. But she knew better than to mistake attention for change. Change had to be earned. And she intended to earn it, quietly, relentlessly. Because she wasn't just reclaiming a position. She was reclaiming the right to be heard. The first sign that the hospital had truly noticed Nadine Carter came not in an announcement, but in the way the corridors grew quieter when she walked through them. Conversations softened. Laughter shortened. People watched her now, not openly, but with the kind of attention that came from realizing you had misjudged something important. She took none of it personally. On her first full shift back in the emergency department, Nadine arrived early. She reviewed charts before anyone asked. Checked equipment. Calibrated monitors. The work grounded her. Anchored her in something real after weeks of being treated like an inconvenience. By mid-morning, the ER was full. Ambulances arrived back-to-back. Trauma alerts stacked on the board. The rhythm she knew so well returned to her bones. A young nurse hesitated beside her. "Ms. Carter," she said. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How do you notice things so fast?" Nadine paused, considering. "I slow down," she said. "Everyone else speeds up." The nurse nodded, absorbing the answer like a gift. Later, a resident double-checked a dosage before administering it, something he hadn't done before. Nadine noticed. She said nothing. Change didn't need applause. That afternoon, a high-profile case rolled in. Middle-aged woman. Sudden collapse. No obvious cause. The room filled quickly, attendings, residents, specialists. Whitaker himself stood just outside the glass, observing. Nadine assessed the patient quietly, her hands sure, her mind moving faster than anyone else's. Subtle signs aligned in her head like puzzle pieces snapping into place. "This isn't cardiac," she said. "It's neurological." The attending frowned. "Her EKG is misleading," Nadine replied calmly. "We need imaging. Now." The room hesitated. Whitaker watched. The attending nodded. "Do it." The scan confirmed it, a hemorrhage, caught early enough to intervene. The patient survived. Word spread. Not loudly. Not officially. But nurses talked. Residents listened. Attitudes shifted. By the end of the week, Nadine's schedule was full again. She was back where she belonged, on the floor, in the thick of it. Yet something lingered beneath the surface. Attention. One evening, as she charted at the nurse's station, she overheard a familiar voice. "You know she's under a microscope now," one resident whispered. "She always was," another replied. Nadine kept typing. Later that night, Whitaker found her in the staff lounge, reviewing notes. "They're watching you," he said. She didn't look up. "They always have." He studied her. "You could have made this louder." Lawsuits. Press. She met his gaze. "I didn't want revenge. I wanted responsibility." Whitaker nodded slowly. Before he left, he paused. There's a board meeting tomorrow. I'd like you there. Nadine considered this. I'm a nurse, she said. Not an executive. He smiled faintly. You're exactly who they need to hear. The next morning, she stood in the boardroom, scrubs replaced by a simple blazer. Faces around the table were cautious. Curious. She spoke plainly. About systems that silenced experience. About how hierarchy could cost lives. About what it felt like to be reduced to a uniform that erased your voice. No drama. No accusation. Just truth. When she finished, the room was still. Whitaker broke the silence. This is why names matter. Later, as Nadine returned to the floor, a nurse caught her arm gently. Thank you, she said. For speaking. Nadine nodded, emotion tightening her throat. That night, as she walked past the spot where she had once knelt with a mop, she paused. The floor gleamed. She stood tall. And for the first time, the hospital seemed to breathe with her instead of over her. The hospital did not change overnight. It pretended to. Emails went out about respect and professional conduct. Posters appeared in break rooms, stock photos of smiling staff beneath hollow slogans about teamwork. Committees were formed. Meetings scheduled. But beneath the polish, old habits resisted. Nadine felt it in the way certain attendings avoided her eyes. In how some residents stiffened when she corrected them, quietly, professionally. Pride, when wounded, healed slowly. The real test came on a Thursday night. The ER was stretched thin. A multi-vehicle accident flooded the department with injured patients. Beds filled. Tempers shortened. Nadine was assigned to triage. She worked steadily, assessing, prioritizing, moving people where they needed to go. Her voice stayed calm even as chaos swirled. Then a man in his late 20s staggered in, supported by a friend. Pale. Sweating. Disoriented. Headache, the friend said. Out of nowhere. Nadine's gaze sharpened. She took the man's vitals. Noted the subtle droop at the corner of his mouth. The way his speech slurred just enough to matter. This is a stroke, she said. We need CT. Now. A resident nearby glanced at the patient. He's too young. Nadine didn't raise her voice. Age doesn't exclude pathology. The resident hesitated. I'll page neurology, he said reluctantly. Minutes passed. The man worsened. Nadine watched the clock, jaw tight. She knew this window. She knew how unforgiving it was. She made a decision. She bypassed protocol and wheeled the patient herself. Ms. Carter, the resident called after her. You can't. She didn't stop. The scan confirmed it. An attending confronted her afterward, anger thinly masking fear. You overstepped, he said. I prevented permanent damage, Nadine replied. Whitaker was called. Again. This time, he arrived quickly. The incident was reviewed. Footage pulled. Data examined. The outcome was undeniable. The patient recovered. The board convened an emergency session. This time, Nadine wasn't the subject. She was the standard. Policies were rewritten, quietly, efficiently. Authority expanded for experienced nurses. Protocols adjusted to value observation as much as hierarchy. Not because it was fashionable. Because it worked. Weeks later, Nadine was called into Whitaker's office. I want you to lead a new initiative, he said. Clinical oversight. Training. Advocacy. She considered this. I don't want to leave the floor, she said. You won't, he replied. You'll change it. She accepted. The laughter that once echoed in the corridor felt distant now. Almost unreal. Yet Nadine remembered it. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because she knew how easily systems forgot who carried them. And she intended to make sure this one never forgot again. The initiative did not come with applause. It came with resistance. Nadine noticed it in the subtle ways first. Meeting invites sent late. Decisions made before she arrived. Conversations that stopped when she entered a room. No one challenged her openly anymore, but they tested the edges of her authority, quietly, persistently. She let them. Change that was forced snapped back. Change that proved itself stayed. Every Tuesday morning, she led clinical review sessions in a small conference room off the trauma wing. No speeches. No grandstanding. Just cases, real ones. Mistakes dissected without cruelty. Successes examined without ego. At first, attendance was thin. Then outcomes improved. Word spread. Residents started showing up early, notebooks in hand. Nurses asked questions they had once been afraid to ask. Attendings began to sit in the back, arms crossed, listening. Nadine never said "I told you so." She didn't need to. One evening, months later, a familiar sound echoed down the corridor, laughter. The same kind. Casual. Thoughtless. Two interns stood near the supply room, watching a woman in scrubs push a cleaning cart toward a spill. "Guess they ran out of nurses again," one muttered. The other chuckled. Nadine stopped. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. She turned and walked toward them. "Who's responsible for this patient?" she asked, nodding toward a chart on the counter. The interns startled. One fumbled for an answer. We're covering." Nadine glanced at the woman with the cart. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Maribel," the woman said, surprised. Nadine turned back to the interns. Maribel noticed the spill and stepped in. "That's what professionals do." The interns flushed. "Tomorrow," Nadine continued calmly, "you'll present on situational awareness and bias in clinical settings. 8 a.m. "Yes, Miss Carter," they murmured. Nadine met their eyes, not with anger, but with certainty. "Laughter teaches people who they're allowed to be careless with," she said. "We don't do that here." The corridor was silent. Maribel whispered, "Thank you." Nadine nodded. "You shouldn't need it." That night, she stayed late, reviewing reports. The hospital hummed around her, steady now, purposeful. Whitaker stopped by. "You're changing the culture," he said. Nadine didn't look up. "Culture resists until it can't." He smiled. "The board wants to name the program after you." She finally looked at him. "No." He raised an eyebrow. "Name it after accountability," she said. "That's the point." He laughed softly. "You haven't changed." She allowed herself a small smile. As she left the hospital that night, she passed the East Wing corridor, the same one where she had once knelt with a mop while laughter floated overhead. She paused. Not in pain. In recognition. The floor was clean. The light steady. The space held no echo of mockery now, only memory. And memory, she had learned, was a responsibility. The incident that changed everything did not happen in the emergency department. It happened in the auditorium. St. Germain Medical Center hosted an annual regional conference every spring, 3 days of panels, continuing education credits, and carefully curated success stories. Administrators loved it. Sponsors funded it. Staff endured it. This year, the keynote speaker was a nationally recognized surgeon flown in from the East Coast. The auditorium filled early. White coats lined the aisles. Residents whispered. Phones glowed. Nadine sat in the third row, notebook closed on her lap. She hadn't planned to speak. Halfway through the presentation, a murmur rippled through the room. A commotion near the side entrance. Security moved quickly, then froze. A man collapsed. Hard. For a split second, the room didn't understand what it was seeing. Then instinct kicked in, people stood, chairs scraped, voices overlapped. Is he okay? Call a code. Someone get help. Nadine was already moving. She reached the man first. Mid-50s. Diaphoretic. Pulse rapid and thready. His breathing was wrong, too shallow, too fast. Clear the aisle, she said calmly. People obeyed without thinking. She knelt, assessing, hands steady. The man's eyes fluttered. Sir, she said. Can you hear me? He groaned faintly. A physician rushed over. I've got it. Nadine looked up. You don't. The words were quiet, but they landed. He's in cardiogenic shock, she said. Likely pulmonary embolism. We need oxygen, for access, and transport now. The physician hesitated, just a second too long. Nadine didn't wait. She directed staff like a conductor, her voice low and precise. Equipment arrived. Oxygen flowed. Vitals stabilized enough to move. As the gurney rolled him out, the room stayed silent. No applause. No chatter. Just the sound of people realizing what they had witnessed. The keynote speaker stood frozen at the podium. Whitaker, seated near the back, exhaled slowly. Later, in the corridor outside the auditorium, the man regained consciousness. Imaging confirmed Nadine's call. Intervention was swift. His life was saved. Word spread through the hospital within the hour, not as gossip, but as fact. That evening, an emergency staff assembly was called. The auditorium filled again, this time without programs or speeches. Whitaker stood at the front. Today, he said, we witnessed what happens when experience is respected. He paused. We also witnessed what happens when it almost isn't. His gaze swept the room. Earlier this year, he continued, a senior nurse at this hospital was reassigned to clean floors during a pending investigation. A murmur rippled. She was laughed at, he said. Dismissed. Ignored. Silence deepened. That nurse saved a life tonight. He turned. Nadine Carter, please stand. She hesitated, then rose slowly. The room seemed to contract around her. This hospital owes you an apology, Whitaker said. And a promise. Nadine's voice was steady when she spoke. I don't need apologies, she said. I need you to listen, to everyone. Every role. Every voice. The room stayed quiet. Then, one by one, people stood. Not clapping. Standing. In acknowledgement. In respect. Nadine felt something loosen in her chest, not triumph, but release. This was the moment. The one that would be told later. The one the hospital would remember. And for the first time, the silence held something else besides restraint. It held truth. The next morning, St. Germain Medical Center woke up different. Not louder. Not softer. Sharper. Emails flooded inboxes before sunrise. Internal memos marked urgent. Department heads were summoned. Schedules were cleared. A sense of something irreversible settled over the building. By 9 a.m., the hospital-wide meeting had been called. Every available staff member crowded into the main auditorium or gathered around screens in break rooms and nurses' stations. Surgeons stood beside janitors. Residents beside orderlies. Hierarchy blurred, just slightly. Whitaker stepped up to the podium. His presence alone quieted the room. "We are here," he said, "because a mirror was held up to us." He let the word sit. "Last night, many of you witnessed a medical emergency handled with exceptional clarity and courage. Some of you have witnessed similar moments before. Others chose not to see them." He paused. "A hospital is only as strong as the voices it listens to." The screen behind him flickered to life. Footage played. The East Wing corridor. Late at night. Fluorescent lights. A woman kneeling with a mop. Laughter drifting through the air. Some people shifted uncomfortably. The footage continued. Room 317. A code blue. A quiet voice correcting a dosage. A life pulled back from the edge. Then the auditorium collapse. The kneeling. The commands. The saved man being wheeled away. The screen went dark. Whitaker turned back to the room. "The nurse in that footage," he said evenly, "is Nadine Carter." The effect was immediate. Breaths caught. Heads turned. Faces changed. Some in recognition. Others in shock. A few in shame. "Nadine Carter," Whitaker continued, "is a senior trauma nurse with 15 years of experience. She was temporarily reassigned during an investigation that found no fault." A murmur spread. "She was laughed at," he said. "And she kept showing up." Silence fell like a held breath. Whitaker gestured. Nadine stood slowly. She didn't smile. She didn't look around. She simply stood, present, composed, unmistakably herself. "I don't want to be an example," she said calmly. "I want to be normal." A few people swallowed. "I want it to be normal for experience to matter. For questions to be welcomed. For uniforms not to decide who gets heard." Her gaze moved across the room. "I cleaned floors because patients still needed care. I spoke up because silence costs lives." She paused. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Beat Stories HQ and tell me where you're watching from. The words didn't feel like a promotion. They felt like an invitation, to witness, to remember, to choose better. The room stayed quiet. Then Whitaker spoke again. "Effective immediately," he said, "we are instituting hospital-wide reforms based on the clinical oversight program Nadine Carter designed." He turned toward her. "And Ms. Carter will serve as Director of Clinical Advocacy." Without leaving the floor. This time, the reaction came. Not cheers. But something heavier. Something earned. As the meeting ended, people approached Nadine, not to congratulate her, but to thank her. A resident spoke first. "I didn't listen that night. I will now." A nurse followed. "You made it safer for all of us." An orderly nodded. "For patients too." Nadine accepted each quietly. Later, alone in the East Wing corridor, she stood where she once knelt. The floor reflected her clearly now. Not distorted. Not broken. Just her. And the hospital, finally, knew her name. After the meeting, the hospital did not erupt into celebration. It went quiet. Not the awkward silence of guilt, but the focused stillness of an institution realizing it had to relearn itself. Policies changed first on paper. Then, slowly, in practice. Supervisors were required to shadow different roles each quarter, not as observers behind glass, but side by side. Attendings cleaned equipment with techs. Residents rotated through transport shifts. Administrators spent nights in the emergency department, listening more than speaking. Some resisted. One senior physician requested a transfer within a week. Another retired earlier than planned. Pride, when cornered, often chose escape. Nadine watched all of it without comment. Her new title meant little to her unless it protected patients. So she stayed where she had always been. On the floor, in the noise, where decisions mattered. One evening, she was called into a trauma bay where a new resident stood frozen, uncertainty written all over his face. "Talk me through what you see," Nadine said gently. The resident took a breath. BP's dropping. Heart rate rising. "He's compensating, but not for long." Nadine nodded. "Good. What's your next move?" They worked through it together. Afterward, the resident sagged against the wall. "I almost waited," he admitted. "For permission." Nadine met his eyes. "Patients don't wait." The word spread faster than any memo ever could. Outside the hospital, whispers turned into stories. Not viral headlines. Not scandals. Something quieter, shared among professionals, among families whose loved ones walked out alive. A journalist called once. Nadine declined. "I didn't do this for attention," she said. "I did it for accountability." Whitaker backed her fully. Weeks passed. Then months. One afternoon, Nadine was asked to speak at a nursing school graduation. She stood before a sea of hopeful faces, caps tilted, futures unwritten. "I won't tell you it's easy," she said. "I will tell you it's worth it. And I will tell you this, never believe that your voice is optional." Students cried. Faculty nodded. Back at St. Germain, a plaque was installed near the East Wing, not with Nadine's name, but with words she had written herself. "Every role matters. Every voice saves lives." Late one night, Nadine walked the corridor alone. She stopped where the caution sign used to stand. For a moment, she remembered the laughter. Not sharply. Not painfully. Just clearly. She understood now what that night had been. A test. And she had passed it, not by fighting, but by enduring without shrinking. Her phone buzzed with a message from Whitaker. "You changed this place." She typed back. "We did." At the end of her shift, she clocked out and stepped into the dawn again. Just as she had months before. But this time, she didn't sit in the car to steady herself. She drove home knowing exactly who she was. And that no uniform could ever erase it again. Justice did not arrive with punishment. It arrived with exposure. An independent review panel, requested quietly by Whitaker and approved without fanfare, completed its work 6 weeks after the auditorium incident. Their report was not dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was precise. Names. Dates. Decisions. Patterns. It showed how often concerns raised by nurses had been dismissed. How frequently senior voices overrode experienced ones without documentation. How reassignment had been used not as protection, but as containment. No single villain. A system. The board released the findings internally first. Mandatory retraining followed. Leadership restructuring. Clear consequences, not public, not performative, but firm. A few managers were removed from decision-making roles. Others were placed under supervision. Some resigned. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't about blame. It was about responsibility. Nadine was offered a seat on the executive council. She declined. "I don't want distance," she said. "I want access." Instead, she helped design a reporting pathway that bypassed ego entirely. Concerns could be raised, reviewed, and acted on without fear of retaliation. Anonymous when needed. Transparent when possible. The first report came in within hours. Then another. Then dozens. Not complaints, concerns. Near misses. Patterns people had been afraid to name. Lives were saved in ways no one could headline. One afternoon, the blonde resident, the one who had laughed months earlier, waited for Nadine near the East Wing. He looked different now. Quieter. I owe you an apology, he said. She regarded him evenly. I didn't see you, he continued. I saw a uniform. I was wrong. She nodded once. What you do next matters more than what you say now. He swallowed. I'm listening. She walked past him. Then start there. That night, a janitor stopped her near the elevators. They told us about the new process, he said. That we can speak up. Nadine smiled gently. You always could. Now they have to listen. At home, she found an envelope taped to her door. Inside was a handwritten note from the man who had collapsed in the auditorium. You didn't just save my life, it read. You saved how my daughter sees hospitals. Thank you for standing when others froze. Nadine sat on the edge of her bed, the note trembling slightly in her hands. Not from sadness. From weight. The good kind. At Saint Germain, a new tradition began quietly. Every orientation included a story, not about a surgeon or a donor or a building. About a nurse who cleaned floors when no one would listen, and spoke anyway. They did not dramatize it. They told it plainly. Because plain truth lasted longer. And somewhere in the East Wing corridor, under steady fluorescent lights, the hospital continued its work, stronger not because it had been shamed, but because it had been changed. Years later, people would still point to the East Wing corridor when they told the story. Not because anything dramatic had happened there after that night, no collapse, no cameras, no speeches, but because of what no longer happened. No laughter. No dismissal. No quiet erasure. The hospital changed in ways that never made the news. It showed in how new nurses were introduced on their first day, not rushed through orientation, not warned to stay in their lane, but asked, what do you notice? It showed in how residents paused before speaking over someone older, quieter, dressed differently. It showed in how janitors, transport staff, and aides were greeted by name, how their observations were written down instead of waved away. And it showed in the numbers. Fewer adverse events. Faster interventions. Lives saved in increments too small for headlines, but too important to ignore. Nadine Carter never became a legend inside the hospital. She became a reference point. Ask Nadine. Run it by Carter. She'll see what we missed. She stayed on the floor, just as she had promised. Still worked nights sometimes. Still wore the same navy scrubs. Still kept her hair pulled back, her voice calm, her presence steady. The difference was no one mistook her silence for absence anymore. One evening, a new nurse found her restocking supplies. Ms. Carter, she said nervously, can I ask you something? Nadine smiled. Of course. Is it true, the nurse asked, lowering her voice, that you used to clean floors here? Nadine paused. Yes, she said. For a while. The nurse looked confused. But, why didn't you leave? Nadine considered the question carefully. Because patients were still here, she said. And because if I left, nothing would change. The nurse nodded slowly, like someone receiving something they didn't yet know how to carry. In the years that followed, Nadine declined promotions that would pull her too far from patient care. She accepted ones that protected others. She helped shape national nursing guidelines. She testified quietly before healthcare boards. She mentored dozens, maybe hundreds, of clinicians who would go on to shape hospitals she would never visit. Her name appeared on no building. That was intentional. Instead, a small plaque remained near the East Wing, not polished, not ceremonial. Just words etched cleanly into metal. Listen early. Listen fully. Lives depend on it. Late one night, long after most of the staff had gone home, Nadine walked that corridor alone. The lights hummed softly. The floor gleamed. She stopped where she once knelt with a mop bucket beside her, laughter drifting overhead like something sharp and careless. She remembered how heavy the silence had been then. And how heavy it had been to carry dignity without witnesses. Now, the silence felt different. Not empty. Complete. She turned and walked back toward the nurse's station, where someone was already calling her name, not because of a crisis, but because her voice mattered. And somewhere far beyond St. Germain Medical Center, this story would travel, quietly, steadily, reminding people that dignity does not announce itself. But it always leaves a mark. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Beat Stories HQ and tell me where you're watching from.